Hi, welcome, welcome. Good afternoon. Good after Wednesday. Good Wednesday. Can't believe it's Wednesday already. Good to see everyone, smiling faces. I'll give you all a minute to get connected. We have a fantastic and interesting program today. My name is Anissa Mitchell and I'm with PMD Alliance. And today we're going to be talking with Julia Wood. She is an occupational therapist and a specialist in movement disorders. And she is going to be discussing micrographia, or small cramped handwriting, and what you all can do about this. But before we get started, I'm going to show you guys, if you're new to this, where you can chat your questions throughout the program. If you take your mouse and hover over at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little box that says chat. If you click on that, you can pop that up and then type your questions as we go along. Sorry, I got muted. I'm muted.
No, you're not. You're not anymore.
All right, I was muted there for a second. Sorry about that. We're going to keep everybody muted just because of background noise, but that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you or we don't want to hear your questions. So feel free to type those in. And I'm going to pass this off to Julia. So like I said, Julia is an occupational therapist and she works with people with movement disorders. And she's done a lot of work with people in regards to having handwriting changes. So if you want to ask questions to her, feel free. And I'm going to pass this off to her as I know she's got a lot of great information to share with all of you. And wait a second, you're muted. We're having some mute issues today. Just give us 1 second. There you are.
Hi, everybody. They said that the quote of 2020 was "you're on mute."
It has been.
I think we've all experienced that. Thank you all so much for joining. I see a lot of people that I know. When I was kind of scrolling through the pictures and being nosy, I've gotten the chats from a few of you, and there's a lot of new faces too. So I'm excited to meet all of you today. So I am going to be talking with you today about handwriting changes with Parkinson's. And then I actually have a friend with me today who is a person with Parkinson's as well and does a lot with her handwriting. She's a fellow ambassador of mine from the Finney Foundation. And so I have some examples of her work. And she was planning to join for the webinar today and then got the call she could get her COVID shot. So if she can jump in with us, of course, I was like, get this shot. Don't worry about the webinar. If she can join in with us toward the end, she will, but I'll get us going here. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. All right. You know, you always have that moment of fear of like, is this the right screen I'm sharing? Not that I have anything weird up on my computer, but you know, you don't want to see like my billing or anything like that. All right. So as Anissa mentioned, we're going to be talking today about handwriting changes. And this is really common for people with Parkinson's. And often, as you guys know, one of the symptoms that is noted before people are even diagnosed. And sometimes people self-diagnose that I've encountered in my years as a clinician. That's the first thing they notice was like, my handwriting's different. And I saw this thing online that says that could be a sign of Parkinson's. So what are we going to do today? Well, first, we're going to discuss what the changes are, because micrographia is actually only one of the changes that we see. There's a lot of other things that can affect your handwriting with Parkinson's. And then if you want to, we are going to practice together using some of the strategies. Keep in mind, this is a little bit of a crash course, so it doesn't mean that at the end of this webinar, your handwriting is going to be magically fixed like I wave a wand. If I could do that, I'd have the Nobel Prize. So we'll just practice and see what we can get done. And then, as I mentioned toward the end of the presentation, I have some content by my friend Kat Hill showing how she uses these different evidence-based practices to address her handwriting. And if she's to where she can speak with us and talk us through the content, we will let her do so. So first thing you might be asking yourself is, what is occupational therapy? You know, is this lady going to get me a job, or does she just use handwriting so I can fill out a job application? I could do that, but occupational therapy was named back when it referred to the things that you need or want to do in a day. So it's a form of therapy that encourages, you know, rehabilitation or improvement in what you'd like to do through the performance of activities that you need to do in your daily life. So we take a very holistic perspective. We look at the environment and what things might support you in doing a task. We look at where the barriers for the task might be, and we really try to adapt the task to meet the person. And you are an integral part of that team. So if you came into the clinic to see me and I noticed on your forms, maybe your handwriting isn't optimal, but you said, I don't really want to work on my handwriting. It's not meaningful to me. If it's not meaningful to you, it's not meaningful to me. So that's where you are really key to the team. It should be person-centered. So let's talk about handwriting in Parkinson's. Well, first off, micrographia, right? I'm sure you've all heard that term a lot. It refers to that small kind of cramped handwriting that often can be illegible, but true micrographia, I almost put an example of it in here, but I felt like it was a little hard to see over a PowerPoint. The letters will be perfectly formed. The writing can be seamless, but the letters are very, very small. And so from that angle, it's hard to read. But what we also notice is what's called decreased amplitude. And you've probably heard about that with the LSVT Loud or LSVT Big programs, where there's that target on amplitude. So what does that mean? It's really the amount of force or effort that's put into the movement. So for example, you might notice that you don't press down on the paper as hard with your pen, or maybe you just kind of skim over the paper when you write. So the amount of force that you're putting into the pen is affected. And that shows up in some of the research studies when they track people using these pads that are able to measure that pressure, like a computer pad. We also see some timing deficits as well. So what does that mean? Think about with freezing of gait, for example. You notice how there's that or festination, where you start to kind of take those runaway train type steps and feel like you can't control your gait. That may or may not happen to you. Same thing can happen with the timing with writing, where people feel like they write really fast and they can't really control the pace of their writing, and it becomes very illegible and often rather scribbly. There can be a breakdown of the movement altogether, and this can be related to the one you see at the bottom of the screen, the freezing of the upper limb, where they feel like the hand kind of gets stuck and won't really move and maybe gets frozen, just like that feeling that your feet are stuck when you go to initiate walking. And it can, you know, feel like mid-sentence, or maybe you start a sentence well or a word well, and then it really trails off. So the movement isn't consistent and fluid and automatic as it once was. Imagine that. We're talking about the basal ganglia, right? So we know that the part of your brain that regulates your movement with Parkinson's is also regulating the movement with your hands, with fine motor coordination, with another thing called limb kinetic apraxia, which is like a coordination in your hands and arms. And sometimes we'll see irregular handwriting where, you know, people have trouble maintaining size or spacing in their words. Dystonia is something that Kat may share with you too, where there can be some cramping or posturing in the hands and the wrist and arms. You might have noticed this sometimes in your toes in the morning. If you haven't taken your medications yet, your toes can cramp, and that can be a form of dystonia. And as I mentioned earlier, just like you have freezing of gait or may have freezing of gait, you can have freezing of the upper limb. And we see this happen when people are trying to bring a fork to the mouth, or doing writing, maybe stirring a pot, and it feels like you try to initiate the movement and you just kind of get stuck. So I think the thing that you can notice about all of these is there's a lot of similarities to your movements with walking or with getting dressed, or all of the movement changes that you may be experiencing related to these different changes with your hand and arm. So it's just very much consistent with what we see with those basal ganglia issues. So what have we learned in the research? And There's been a good amount of research, believe it or not, on handwriting with this. And they've taken a lot of different approaches to doing exercises or strengthening exercises, making loops, you know, a lot of different approaches in the literature. So what they found is, the big one that's come out recently is practice, this intensity of practice. And so the last two articles that were pretty significant, one by Collette, one by Knackertz. The Knackertz article, the people did their writing 5 times a week for 30 minutes at a time. That's a lot, right? And it was over an extended period of time. I believe it was 6 weeks. So that's a lot of practice. And they did find that people made improvements, and it seemed to respond to what we call motor learning, because some of the changes were maintained. They were able to keep these, you know, practice constructs going better. But what we do know is it doesn't make it perfect, right? It makes it better. So you do have to continue to practice. Another research study came along, and they looked at people doing 1 hour 2 times a week. So that's still a lot of practice, right? And they were doing some hand exercises and doing some, you know, like worksheets, and they did some better. But still, what happened in that study, people perceived their handwriting was better, so they were happier with their performance, but it didn't really show up in the size or the amplitude when they measured that. So it's not something we can just fix. Lines on paper help. There was even a study that looked at wider, you know, kind of like a wide ruled versus a college ruled. And guess what? With writing, bigger is better because it gives you a bigger target to aim for. Easier flow type pens can sometimes help, especially if you have trouble with pushing down into the paper as you're trying to write, because that kind of makes it a couple of tasks that you're trying to do at once. One thing that emerges often, and this was in my clinical practice and in the research, is that print is typically better and easier than cursive. And think about it, with print, we're controlling one stroke, usually at a time, where with cursive, you've got to control that fluid stroke over and over. That does not mean, however, that you should just give up writing cursive. If your cursive is still something that's important to you and something that you value, you'll notice in the samples, and I'm going to show Kat's work later, you can still continue to do cursive. Print is going to be easier. So I tell people, let's say you're taking notes at the doctor's office, right? Or you're writing a grocery list for your family. That might be the time to print, you know, and make sure it's really legible for someone else. But then maybe you're writing a note to a friend and you want to take your time and do cursive, then absolutely, it's a good practice. It's a good task to do. Notice this next one. What do we know about dual tasking with Parkinson's? It makes everything harder. And I think most of us would admit to, whether we like it or not, without Parkinson's, it makes everything harder. I typically goof up or make a mistake or an error when I'm trying to do 2 things at once. So they found that when people are distracted, and I think in some of the studies, it was noting a tone being sounded when they were writing, things like that really impact performance. So as much as you can take out distractions when you're trying to write, you know, sit, give yourself a quiet space, that's going to help your performance as well. This last one is really important to note, and this came up in several different articles. Size for speed. So if you write bigger and more legible, you're typically going to write slower. So you kind of have to sacrifice the speed of your writing for the size. So I know this is not the most welcome thing to say in this crowd, because it makes it, again, something that's going to take longer to do, right? And something you have to give yourself more time to do. But the thing to know is if you give yourself that time, you carve out that space for that practice, you can improve it. And one that I meant to add on here and failed to, and I apologize, is exercise. Oh my gosh, another person coming on here telling us to exercise, because they found in, I believe it's the J. Albert study where they were looking at cycling, that people's handwriting got better. In LSVT big, sometimes we see without targeting handwriting, that people's handwriting gets better. And there was a poster presented at CSM for physical therapy practitioners recently, and they found that they compared a group that exercised and was working on handwriting versus a group that was not exercising and working on handwriting. And the group that was exercising was able to maintain their size better and able to calibrate the size better. So once again, exercise is medicine. You got to do it. And I want to just point out this little quote down at the bottom, because some of you may have a hand tremor. That can be common. And often we see out in, different blogs and recommendations, this idea of using weighted utensils or weighted cuffs or weighted pens. There is no support. There has been no evidence shown that supports the clinical recommendation of using weighted utensils or wrist weights to alleviate tremor. The amount of weight you would need to control a tremor, you wouldn't be able to pick the pen up, so it would be a little pointless. Now, does that mean that you shouldn't try something weighted if you want to? Absolutely. I don't believe that people are research studies, right? You're individuals. But what we have seen is, unfortunately, no one's been able to show that it works. And in all my years as a clinician, I have to admit, I inherited this weighted pen from an OT prior to me, and I kept sending it out for people to try. I never had one person come back and say it was helpful. And you know what? I could never get rid of that pen because people just gave it back to me. So I was trying. So I would say, try it if you want, but definitely, buyer beware. They're kind of expensive and they haven't been shown to be effective. So that's what we know. Any questions so far? I'm not sure if you guys like to just hold questions for the end, or Anissa, if there's been a lot of questions coming in, I can hit them now.
So there's been a couple of questions. So one person had asked if coloring book activity helps.
Absolutely. And I think that's something you're going to note from Kat's experience later. There has not been a specific research study done on coloring books, so I'll say that. But anytime you're doing things to work on your fine motor skills, right? Control the flow of your gel pen or your crayon or whatever it is you happen to be using, that's going to help. And Kat will talk about how she's used a lot of different mediums and art and things to help with that. So I think for sure, and especially if it's enjoyable, it's motivating to you, I think it's a great activity to do.
And then there was a question when you were referencing exercise, any particular type of exercise that's beneficial for handwriting?
What they've looked at is it's just been different types of cardiovascular exercise. You're talking again about kind of your high intensity cardio, and it seems to stimulate the system. They haven't really found any evidence to support like a specific handwriting exercise. So that's not, we're not talking about like hand exercise, definitely no squeeze balls or things like that. In fact, one study looked at hand strength. So they did a lot of strengthening exercises with people. And at the end, they tested to see if their writing was better. No, their hand strength improved, but their writing did not improve. So when we're talking about exercise, that's a great question. We're really talking again, just that general high intensity cardiovascular exercise.
That's it for the questions related to what you've discussed thus far.
Excellent. Thanks so much. I like to hit those so the content's not so far gone before we move on. Okay. I wanted to highlight this study, and because for me anyway, it was tremendous. I love it. So there's a lot going on in the research now. I wouldn't say a lot, but a good chunk that's really looking at the role of motivation with the basal ganglia. So this study basically was checking to see if you target specific goals for someone. So let's say you came into the clinic and you said, I want to be able to button my shirt more efficiently. Like I had a gentleman one time, he wanted to be able to button his shirt for his daughter's wedding, so his wife wouldn't have to worry about helping him button his shirt the day of the wedding. And there's two approaches you could take, and often OTs will take a couple of different approaches. You can do all these different hand activities and putty and pegs and, different clips and paper clips and things like that, and try to work on fine motor coordination. So they did that with one of these groups, or they took the other group and whatever their goal was. So if it was buttoning your shirt, guess what? You worked on buttoning your shirt. If it was, you know, doing a recipe, then you worked on completing a recipe. If it was cross stitch, you would do cross stitch. And so they targeted specifically to whatever that person's goal was. That was the therapeutic medium. They worked on driving amplitude, on the size of the movement, on getting people to move in a more effective way. And here's what was interesting. Which group do you think did better? You can kind of think about it for a minute. A lot of times we think that the group that did all the exercises, right, and like really had an exercise program would do better. The group that practiced whatever their goal was actually not only did better as far as attaining their goals, but did better on these different measurements of hinge strength, grip strength. So the thought of the researchers is, and a lot of therapists, I think, working, when we're motivated to do something, we're going to work harder at it, right? It's meaningful. It has some meaning to it. Like that gentleman wanting to button his shirt for his daughter's wedding. That's huge. You know, that's better than sitting and doing pegs and putty all day long. So the idea now is looking more at, if there's something you want to do, try to do that activity, have it be meaningful to you, you know, work with someone to help you move effectively and efficiently. Maybe the environment needs to be adapted, but do what matters to you. There's my soapbox. I'll get off that one. But I think it's so important because often, you know, I think therapists think they should give these exercises, and as clients, sometimes you think I should have an exercise protocol, and it's really more, what do you want to do? And now let's do it, and let's do it well. All right, so let's try the strategies based on what we just talked about. So,
can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
Before we go there. So one person wrote in, I'm an architect and I can draft as usual, unaffected by my handwriting, which is small and terrible. Any explanation why that is that you know of? And have you heard of a similar phenomenon in your patients?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So think about it with drafting, right? You're drawing a very specific line, or you're drawing a very specific shape. I've had people who could do art, they could do calligraphy, they could draw, but then when they would try to write, it goes into this. A lot of it is that automaticity. You're going back into this automatic pattern of movement, and it's hard to maintain that based on the changes that have happened in the basal ganglia. We see that breakdown of movement, where when you draft, you're drafting one line at a time, right? So what I would encourage you to do is when you approach your writing, approach it almost like you're drafting, like you're drawing for those drafting symbols or those drafting lines, rather than thinking of just trying to write. So that's very, very normal and very common, but very good question. Thank you.
Can I have another one? This person says, I have micrographia. My OT gave me exercises. However, they have arthritis in both hands. The exercises were too painful to do, so they had to stop and basically given up on handwriting and now do all by keyboard and voice recognition. If I have to fill out a form, I scan it in and fill it out with my computer. Any suggestions for that?
So here's the thing. I mean, I think you've made great adaptations, and you have a couple of things going on. Number one, I would say there was probably no exercise that your OT could give you that was going to make your handwriting better. And so if they hurt your hands, ditch that. Now, my question would be, and maybe you can chat into Anissa here, does it hurt for you to do handwriting? Is that painful?
We'll give him a second to respond.
Yeah.
Yes,
No problem.
It hurts.
It hurts. So that right there is a reason to go to an adaptive mode of using a computer, using a keyboard, printing forms, like you said. I think that's super smart. You know, you could try some things if you wanted with writing, like building up the pen, you know, and there's an ergonomic pen that I'm going to show at the end that really opens up and loosens up your grip. It's called the Pen Again. So you could try that. More than likely though, with your art, it sounds like your your arthritis is impacting your handwriting, you know, equally with your Parkinson's. So you would probably have to write, you know, still for short periods of time, take breaks, you know, and maybe do it when you're not in a symptom flare up. But at the same time, you know, if it's painful and that pain we know is your body's way of telling you this is not good, you know, we're doing damage here. So you definitely want to listen to that with your arthritis. And I would not say try to push beyond it. You know, if you can do it in a pain-free way with an adaptive pen, you could try that. But I think the adaptations you've made are really, really spot on.
And I love another person's idea. Before her husband's handwriting got too bad, she had a rubber stamp made of his signature.
Yep, yep. And you can get stamps, you guys, made of just about anything. Like I had a lady who had really significant tremor from essential tremor. So a little different. It's an intention tremor. And she had a pen pal in another country that was a child that she would send a letter to like each week or month. And it had this really long address. And so she got a stamp made of the address. So all she had to do, she had a signature stamp, but she also had her address stamp. And I think she ended up getting a few other ones too. So if there's things, you know, you frequently have to write, that's a great option.
And that's it for now. We'll let you go on with your activity.
Excellent. Thank you. Good questions. You guys are awesome. Okay, so let's talk about, I mentioned earlier the environment, right? And how you set up for writing is super important. So it's a great idea to sit at a table or a desk. You know, don't try to stand at a counter or, you know, sit on the couch and have a book in your lap. You're really going to want to support your body and your posture as much as possible. If you can, have your feet flat on the floor in your chair, you know, have as much of your back supported as you can. And then we want to be sure and use the table or the desk to support your arm. So we call it degrees of freedom in therapy, but if I've got my arm supported and I'm just moving my hand, that's very different than my arm not being supported and trying to write on like a check stand, you know, at the grocery store or the bank. So sit and support your arm. If you can, I mentioned that wide ruled paper, and that can be, can hold up a couple here, you know, just like a typical, you know, notebook, like a wire ruled notebook that has the wide rule on it, or you might have some kind of notepads around that have a really wide rule, but something, if you can, lines, period, but the bigger the better. Trying a larger grip pen can be a good idea. So I've got one here that, you know, I can't remember where I got this, but it's a little bit bigger and that can help compared to like, you know, a stick pen or pencil that's really narrow because we have to grip a lot tighter on that. Stabilize your paper, so important. So a lot of times I find I'll work with people in their writing and the paper's moving all over the place, and that's part of what's making it so illegible. So use a clipboard or use your other arm and hold that paper nice and still. Take breaks as you need. You will find that the longer you write, the more the writing breaks down. So doing little bits, you know, if you're going to write bills, for example, or write checks for bills, don't sit down and prepare to write all of your checks at once. You know, maybe do one check and then do some filing or something in your office, or, you know, get up and get a drink, come back, do another one. So kind of break it down a little bit. The most important thing, and the reason for my turtle on the screen, take your time. If you rush, it will not go well. Think about with your walking, right? What happens if you rush? A lot of times that's when falls happen. So, you know, the basal ganglia, dopamine, those are all things that make our movement automatic and unconscious. And so with that lack of it, you know, you just have to be more conscious, a little more diligent, a little more aware, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. And then we're also going to do a little warm up for our hands too. All right, so this is just a way to get the hands moving. So I want you to make a tight fist with me. A lot of you have probably already done these somewhere in your days. And I want you to open the hands really big. Good, do that again. Fist and open. It's like you've gone to wash your hands somewhere and they didn't have a towel, and now we got to get the water off those hands. Really spread them open big, okay? If you want, you can interlace fingers and give them a little stretch, but we just want to wake them up a bit. All right, So if you would like to try it, grab your lined notebook paper for me. Remember, we're going to sit with the arm supported on that desk or table. Grab a bigger grip pen if you can. And this is what we call blocked practice. So this relates back to those motor learning principles. So when we're talking about motor learning, we break tasks into little chunks and build up to it and build the complexity working on different units of practice. So here, you can start on your paper if you want to, and if not, we'll just kind of talk through it. And I want you to take your time, try to use those lines, write a big uppercase A, and then make a space, lift your pen, take your time, a little lowercase a. We'll just do a few of these. Move it over, do a big B, and then do a lowercase b. Move it over, give yourself some space, a big C, and then a small c. Keep it going. If you notice it starts to get small, stop, do a few flicks, go back into it again, and think of making each letter big. So for our architect out there, that was a great example of here, think of the letters almost just like lines or shapes that you're drawing rather than just drawing a letter. We'll just do this for a few more minutes. I don't want to bore you with it too long. Just keep making them big. If they get small, stop, few flicks, reset, start again, okay? If you find it starts to get small and starts to break down, don't keep going, stop and reset. Okay, we'll get just a couple more minutes on this. And I don't want you to feel like this is going back and trying to learn your alphabet again. It's not about that. It's viewing it as writing letters instead of writing words. And a lot of times when we write that word, that's where it all kind of blurs in together. So it's looking at it and saying, all right. So now give us a little feedback here. How'd you do? You can give, you've got reactions you can use. You can chat, Anissa, can let us know, was that better, same, worse? What do you find you're able to do?
Like I said, excellent tip, it works.
It worked, okay. Excellent, excellent. And I don't want anybody to feel like you have to act like, oh my gosh, that was miraculous.
One person said it was worse, it was terrible. And you can hold your writing up if you want to and share it. Some people are saying it works, and I think it's probably, like you said, it's gonna take your time and do some practice. Yeah, it's not going to be perfect, but it'll be better. I think
absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Being patient. Using the hand exercise helps, so, your hands get tired when you're writing. So sometimes you just do these flicks.
For sure. For sure. And you guys remember those two studies I talked about that had any significance? We're talking an hour of practice twice a week or 30 minutes 5 times a week. So that's a lot, right? 120 or 150 minutes. So that's a whole lot. We just did, I think, 2 minutes. So there's probably more work we could do.
Yeah, somebody said using a pencil with soft lead helped them. Using lines helps them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so different. I think you just have to try out different things to see what works for you.
Absolutely. Remember, you're all individuals. You're not research studies. And so I've had people that ballpoint pens were the best. I had other people that hated ballpoint and gel point was better, or those fine tip Sharpies. It really depends. I would say experiment with a lot of different types of pens and different approaches for sure.
Oh, and this is a very true statement. Where I am on my med cycle has a biggest impact. So if you're wearing off, that will definitely have an impact.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's something to be mindful of, and just kind of, leave those tasks for when your meds are more on, if you can.
And I did have a really interesting question. I'm going back to it. that just relates to the issue with handwriting in general. So they wanted to know if there was a correlation with handwriting, typing ability, and VR, virtual reality or voice. I
Virtual
don't
reality,
know.
maybe.
Degrade, same time, or independent. So are those kind of symptoms independent, or is there a correlation with them?
It's all talking about, it falls into the categories of what we consider to be fine motor coordination and limb kinetic apraxia. So, coordinating tiny little movements of the fingers and the hand and the wrist and the arm to make these finite, precise movements. And all of those, typing involves that, handwriting. So you'll find very similar if you, typically have trouble with one of those, often you'll have trouble with all of them. So, yeah.
And then another person said they want to know if there's any tips for left-handers.
For left-handers. Well, one of the tips, that's a really great question, is to not use a wired notebook like I showed earlier, because that wire's on the left-hand side and it really gets in the way. You also want to make sure your positioning becomes really important. And sometimes people were taught kind of not so good positioning strategies because they didn't want to look conspicuous among other students. So you get kind of that wrapping with the left hand so they could still have the paper the other, angled the same way as the other pupils. So I would say, look at how you're positioning yourself, look at the position with the arm, but then all the same strategies apply for left hand other than that, leaving out the wire rule.
And I'm going to let you go on here, but one more question, because I think this
Sure.
is very relatable to people, and that's filling out forms.
Yes.
A lot of times like physician office forms or just forms that we fill out for a variety of different things, the space for it is so tiny. And we're trying to write bigger and more legibly, so that can be challenging. So any tips like, maybe getting them ahead of time and taking breaks and doing them slowly, or anything that you can offer them?
Yep. Several things that Anissa just mentioned. One thing you can ask, if you know that that's a problem and maybe the office you're going to, you can ask, like the one lady said earlier, to have them send the forms to you ahead of time so you can fill them out at home, or you could even fill them out with your computer. We had a table at our clinic, and so often we would, let people sit at the table if we knew that, if they wanted to, so they could have that arm support. Another trick that I've had some people use is if they have a large bag, and I mean this, well, it could be men or women. If you have a large like briefcase type bag, then you can put that across your lap sometimes in a way that's supported by the arms of the chair, so it almost makes like a desk, and then you can get that arm support. So that's a tricky way to try to create the arm support if you have to. But I think to keep in mind, just like all other things, stress impacts this as well. So if you get in a situation in an office and you feel stressed and put on the spot, and then it's probably going to be a lot harder for you to do. So that's another reason to try to get those forms maybe early, because stress definitely impacts it. Great questions. You guys are awesome. I like this group. All right, I'll move forward. We're going to do one more thing. All right. And this is something that you can do on your own. So this is a pangram. And all a pangram is it makes you write all the letters of the alphabet. Another trick sometimes that people do that helps is writing in all capital letters or all uppercase letters. So get your arm support, do a few flicks to set up, get those hands ready to go. Get your big grip pen and try writing in all caps. And with all caps, use the lines on your paper. Start each letter at the top of that line and really make your letters big. All right, how did we do? Oh, you're muted, Anissa.
I know, I see that. I'm a little slow on that. Haven't had too many people make a comment about that one. I noticed that
Okay.
I tried it and I revert into using lowercase and have to be more
Yep.
mindful about that. But this person, the
Absolutely.
capital writing is great, and they did great in all caps. So
Okay. So that's another strategy to try, right? And maybe not all the time, but maybe sometimes, like grocery list or, you know, to-do list or whatever you need it for.
And
You know,
it's a
I forgot to do. Go
and then they're
ahead.
still writing. There's a long sentence and they're still writing.
Okay, and that's good. You're taking your time.
Capital writing
Rachel?
is better.
Excellent. Rachel, I totally forgot to launch the polling questions in the beginning.
Well, let's launch. Would you
Yeah,
like
let's
to?
go for it. Yeah,
Okay.
please.
We're launching some questions for you.
So have you noted any changes to your handwriting with Parkinson's? I meant to do this in the beginning, you guys, and I totally forgot. I think because I was so excited seeing people I knew in here, I was just like, yay. And then I was distracted and messed up.
Right.
I think we got like 60% in.
Yeah, it looks like, yeah, 98% are saying yes.
Wow. Okay. Excellent. Thank you all. And then how about, I think we've got one more question there. Okay. Oops, we got that one.
All right. And I think
I'm not sure if I can do the next one.
Oh, okay.
Here we go. Here we go.
There we go.
There we go. Have you tried any approaches to improve your handwriting? So you notice there I've got OT, some of you have already mentioned that, or hand exercises, or writing exercises, or sometimes you might take an exercise group and there's some things in it for your writing or for your hands.
All right. Oh, this one's saying pull to can't select more than one item. So I guess
Oh,
choose
gotcha.
the most relevant one.
Okay, it doesn't let you select all but apply. You only get one.
All
Sorry.
right, you get one choice. All right.
Sorry about that, guys. We tried to be fancy.
All right. And can you share the results, Rachel? There we go.
All right. So it's like most of you have done some hand exercises, you know, almost half. About 27% of you have tried some writing exercises, and only 18% exercise, only 12% have tried occupational therapy. So I would definitely encourage you, you know, to consider it and think about working with an occupational therapist on this, and seeing if maybe that would help. But thank you for sharing that. All right. So let's move forward here. I think somebody had their hand up earlier too. Do they still have their hand up?
Maureen Olson, they'll need to chat their questions if they can.
Okay.
And I did have a question, a couple of people wanting to know about changing up their signature legally. Like if they used to have signature that was in cursive and then they go to block lettering. Do you know of any issues with that?
That is something you would want to discuss with your financial institution, you know, or if you have different, you know, contracts, if you're talking banking or mortgage or whatever it is. And you might consider, and if you do consider this, you have to discuss it as well, going to that signature stamp. So they can take an old signature that you've done, you know, that was one that you liked, make a stamp of it. And then you want to make sure that that's allowed with whatever, you know, document you're signing. But definitely you want to let people know. And your doctor, I've had a few people, the doctor wrote a note for them, you know, that they've had significant handwriting changes and now they're using a stamp or they're using block lettering, but it's just a good thing to have that documented.
And I know you've talked about OT as an option for this, and people are wanting to know about it coverage from their insurance.
Oh, absolutely. So you should have no trouble, especially with Medicare, for coverage for occupational therapy services. And handwriting, it's all about how the goal is written by the therapist. Now, can I just write that I'm going to work on handwriting with someone? No, I have to put that I'm going to address their handwriting so that they can sign checks or, create financial list or to-do list or whatever. It needs to be linked to something functional that you have to do. But then it should be covered, no problem.
And I think the person who had their hand raised was wanting to know about exercises for improving cursive writing. So I know you've just addressed it in general, but are there any specifics for cursive?
Cursive, what you're looking at is like looping strokes, right? So sometimes I'll have people draw an infinity loop. So practicing that to get that big looping stroke. Then I know in a few of the research studies, they had people just do these continual loops. So practicing that and then trying your cursive. Still with your cursive, you have to focus on taking your time and really making it big. And I would start with letters or words over sentences. So for example, you guys, we did the block practice with letters. Typically what I do with people next is we go to words. So you've written letters, right? We've gotten those legible. Now we go to words like a grocery list or a to-do list, but writing a list of words, then we start to go into sentences. We're gradually building up the complexity of it. And same thing with cursive. Excellent, good questions. All right, well, let's move on and see if we can get, not sure if Kat is still on. Oh, sorry, before I get Kat. So this is the ergonomic pen I was talking about, you guys, there on the side, that blue pen. And you'll notice it just fits around the finger. They're on Amazon. It's called the Pen Again, or I've heard they have them at some Staples and office supply stores. And it just loosens up the grip. So especially the lady with arthritis might find this a little bit more comfortable. And sometimes people find these more comfortable as well. The yoga hands there just give a passive stretch. So sometimes you might notice your hands have gotten kind of curled or maybe a little tight. When we do those flicks, trying to open them is more difficult. Some people just find that feels like a really nice stretch or opening. And then the link I've put there that we can send out is a program called Better Handwriting for Adults by the National Adult Literacy Agency. And it has some different, worksheets and things you can do with letter writing, with doodles and filling out forms. It's a really nice program that you can download and just kind of practice with the worksheets that they have in there if you like. All right, so on to Kat. Is Kat still on, or am I talking for Kat?
I believe she is on, and we are working to get her so she can be unmuted.
Okay.
While we're doing that, got a couple more questions. Somebody wants to know if handwriting is a use it or lose it type of thing. I just type or voice to text, and it's fine for my lifestyle, but I'm not ready to never write again. So.
Yep. I think that, that's one of those concepts of neuroplasticity. I'm really glad you brought that up. Use it or lose it. If you stop doing something, you will lose the ability to do it. And we even know now that what happens in the brain is it's called pruning. So these little microglia go in, and it's like they disconnect. It's like, oh, well, you're not using that anymore. We can disconnect that wiring. So definitely it's okay to have backups for maybe bad days or off times, or, you know what I mean? A time that maybe you're not feeling so good, to use different techniques or adaptations. But then for sure, if you're not ready to give up your writing, it is a use it or lose it. You have to do it. You have to practice it.
All right. And I think Kat's on, but in the meantime, they're wanting to know that Better Handwriting email address again, and I'm going to type it in the chat.
Okay, for sure. Absolutely.
Julia, can you hear me?
Yes.
Fabulous.
Hey, Kat. I know you tell me when to forward slide, and I will. Okay, so I'm just going to mute myself.
Are you ready for me to roll?
Go for it.
Okay. So I just want to say that I started doing this before I knew there was any data around it. And it's just exciting for me to hear that there's some research going on about it, because a lot of my Parkinson's friends have said, how do you keep your handwriting so nice? And I think what I've told them, and now there's data to support it, that it's staying nice because I do it a lot. I use it every single day. And I don't do it because I feel like I have to. I do it because I really like doing it. And I've made it into fun activities. And I think a lot of the data that Julia shared, the research, if you like doing something, you're motivated to do it, you're going to do it. So I write handwritten letters. You can, Julia, feel free to just click ahead whenever. But I hand stitch, I make art, I participate in vision boarding, I cut up things with scissors, and I play a lot, and not everything is a work of art. And my goal is not to make it a work of art. It's to express creativity, make lists. One of the big things Julia talked about is your paper moving. That was really frustrating for me. That really impacted my ability to enjoy things. So I switched to using notebooks. I use a lot of the inexpensive composition notebooks. That does several things. It secures your paper. You can put clips on the end of it, paper clips, or I use what are they? Like laundry clips, clothesline clips, and it secures it for me so it's not moving around. It's also very inexpensive. I don't feel like it's precious. I can write a lot. If I get fancy paper, I feel like I'm being wasteful just writing letters and numbers. And you can see I do both printing and handwriting. And when I do handwriting, I learned a technique to do kind of continuous line. So I will write a word and then I'll drag my line. And I don't know if that page on the left, I'm on my phone, so everything's pretty tiny for me, is continuous line. You might go to the next slide, Julia. If I write cursive, I'll drag my cursive line in between. So that way I'm not having to pick up my hand. And I think that's stopping and starting. I don't know if the data would support that, Julia, or not, but that motion, somehow it's easier for me to continue to do it if I'm not picking up my pen. I like the gel pens and the ballpoint pens for the freedom of movement. And I thought I'd touch too on the gentleman that was talking about being an architect and being able to draw his lines. If you think about learning a new kind of language or a new kind of handwriting, it can be that, like, you put yourself in that mindset. Okay, I'm going to try, I don't know, sans serif, or don't know if I'm saying that, sans serif, or Times New Roman. It challenges your brain in a different way than I'm just going to write in my regular handwriting. And I found that to be helpful. This is just a page. I've also learned how to watercolor. I don't think I do it very well, but it's surely a sense of surrender, sort of like having Parkinson's disease. You don't have a lot of control over water and color on a page, sort of like you don't have control over your Parkinson's symptoms a lot of the time. But these are just, and I'll stick stickers on things. Like today, I got a sticker telling me that I could go at 11:58 after observation. I'm going to stick that in my notebook, and I'm going to journal about my experience about getting my vaccine and trying to be on a webinar at the same time. So let's see. This was me horsing around with different kinds of writing. You notice the all caps, cutting and pasting, again, I think is good for my hands. Again, not works of art, but kind of a nice detailed, day description. I also wanted to add, Julia talked about, setting up your workstation. I think that's really important. I got an ergonomically good work chair, especially since COVID, that has armrests for me that are comfortable. I have a space that I decorate lovely because I like going to it then. I light a candle sometimes while I'm sitting and painting just because I like the ambiance of it. I put on I don't always put on nice music for the same reason we talked about, that multitasking, but I might put on nice music after I make a piece of art as my reward. So is there another slide, Julie? I can't remember how many I gave you. You showed me, and there we go. I'm going to so if anybody has any questions or concerns, thoughts about getting stuck, how to get started, ways to get creative, feel free to reach out to Julia. She can put you in touch with me. I'm always happy to dialogue. I think she mentioned that I'm a Davis Phinney ambassador, and I really want to be accessible for people. I'm 6.5 years into my journey, and I'm really determined that this art and writing is going to be with me long term. And it may just look a little different. Maybe I'll master all of the different fonts by the time I'm at the end of my journey. But anyway, go for it. If I can learn how to watercolor, I'm a retired nurse midwife who delivered babies. If I can learn how to watercolor, you can learn how to do it too. And even with my hands and the dystonia that I've struggled with, you know, I just keep going. So, Julia, do you have questions for me? Did I cover what you'd hoped?
Great. That was absolutely fantastic. And I just wanted to comment too that Kat and I are both on a subcommittee for the World Parkinson's Congress. And we were talking about creativity because there's been a lot of research on creativity. And so you guys, you might be looking at what Kat's done. You know, I'm just going to go back to these a little bit. And you might think, oh, I'm not creative. I don't do anything like that. But a lot of people find they have a creative spark with Parkinson's that comes out, and they start to explore different mediums. And, you know, an artist is born. So don't underestimate it.
Yeah, I was the midwife in the practice who would tell people with stick figures what position their baby was in. Here's the head, here's the arms, and here's the feet. So I've graduated a little from that.
It's incredible. I just thank you so much for sharing that. I really
thanks for having me join you, and for your patience with me being all over the place.
And I'm glad you're vaccinated. That's good too.
Yeah, number one. Yeah,
absolutely. Oh, thanks, Kat. So you guys, your takeaway messages today, and then you can ask questions to both of us. You know, like Kat said, find an enjoyable place in your home to practice. You know, always support your forearm and your posture. Approach your writing as an exercise or an activity that's fun, but also to improve your performance. So you've got to take it a little serious, you know, and work on it. Make it meaningful and practice daily if you can. Take your time and focus on it. Free yourself of distractions and give yourself that moment to really work on it. Take breaks when you need and don't feel bad about taking them. And the most important thing is make it fun. You know, let it be meaningful to you, let it be important to you, and have a good time with it. If you find, I sometimes would tell my clients, think of it like a scale of 0 to 10. If you start to hit 7 on the frustration meter, bag it, you know, come back to it later. It's not worth it. But I appreciate all your time and attention. And so I'll stop sharing, and then maybe you guys have questions or.
There's quite a few comments of you giving them lots of great tips and fun ones to boot. And they love the theme of fun that has been throughout your examples today and your practice. So thanks for sharing that. And this has been very helpful. People like the larger pens with the grips. You've given them a lot of really great and practical tools, which I think is very beneficial. So I want to thank both of you so much for joining us today. I love that we had so many people join us and to talk about this, one of the subjects that we really don't talk that much about, but is certainly an impact, as we saw from the polls today, on people's lives. So thank you for both of you, Julia and Kat, for sharing your wisdom, your experience, and how you've gone from stick figures to making these beautiful things that I envy, in that artistic things that I can't do that I wish I could. So it's beautiful. I guess we all can aspire to do better in whatever it is. So thank you so much. And those of you who are asking for some of the resources, we'll try to get those for you and see if we can get some slides, what parts of those that we can get that we can share with everyone. I want to thank you both for joining us today. I want to thank everyone that joined us today. And if we could just give a wave of gratitude to our lovely speakers today, thanking them for their time and expertise. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Have a good rest of your Wednesday, everyone. We will see you again very soon.
Thank you, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Happy writing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have fun.
Thanks.